false facts impede the progress of science. I'm paraphrasing a famous quote from Charles Darwin, who warned that false opinions tended not to last too terribly long because people enjoyed debating them, people enjoyed refuting them. But false facts could endure for a very long time and truly impede the progress of science. In the last 10 years, I have seen an orthodoxy built upon the false facts that were supposedly established by one now famous university professor, Erica Chenoweth. Extinction Rebellion is an ecological campaign in the United Kingdom, and they claim that they can change the course of history if they can just mobilize 2 million unhappy people. The population of the Gaza Strip is 2 million. When you think about this vague term, mobilize, how mobilized do you think climate change protesters in the United Kingdom are? Not when you're talking about dozens and not hundreds, not thousands, but on the scale of millions. How intensely, how passionately do they care about their cause compared to the average inhabitant of the Gaza Strip, compared to the average suicide bomber, compared to the average terrorist diehard supporter of any of the various Palestinian revolutionary movements? In terms of the supposed methodology of disruption, if you had to assign a number to how disruptive it is for ecological protesters in the United Kingdom to barge into a grocery store, take milk off the shelves, take the caps off the milk, and pour the milk on the floor. Disruption. And their favorite example that they like to use in their own lectures for whatever reason is of people sitting down on a road and stopping traffic. That's their most idealized. It's the example they use most often for whatever reason, their choice. Okay, pouring out milk, sitting on a road. How disruptive do you think that is compared to what just happened in Gaza, in Israel, in the Middle East, within the last month? How do you think they compare? This number 2 million, I'll come back to why it is that 2 million is the magic number in just a moment, rings in my ears for more than one reason. 2 million inhabitants of the Gaza Strip, 2 million climate change protesters, 2 million Indigenous people in Canada. Did you know that one? 2 million. We do not remotely have 2 million people who can speak an Indigenous language. Many, many, many of those people, counted among the 2 million, have a very distant connection to the culture, to the language, to the history. They maybe are aware that they have just one grandparent or just one great grandparent. This is the reality of post-genocide, post-British Empire Canada. It's interesting three-way comparison here. The people of the Gaza Strip are certainly concentrated into one relatively tiny location, whereas the indigenous people of Canada are spread out over a huge area, perhaps the second largest country in the world. When you think about the connections that bind people together in a political movement, that give them a sense of common cause, of purpose, of esprit de corps, that give their movement long-term staying power. Really, a Cree person from eastern Quebec has a lot in common with a Cree person from western Saskatchewan. We could pick a reservation here, reservation there. Now, again, today, incredibly few of them speak any language other than English or any language other than French. They probably can't communicate in Cree. But even if they could, the difference in the dialect is quite extreme. There was one Cree language spread out over a huge area, but there were very significant dialect differences there, and I've formally studied them. I'm one of the very few white people you could talk to. if I can be counted as white. In jail, I'm not white. At any rate, if they could speak the language of their grandparents or great-grandparents, they'd have difficulty communicating with each other. But nevertheless, they're united by political circumstances, by the historical experience of being conquered by the British Empire, incorporated into what's now Canada. And they have so much in common in terms of their struggle. The questions they have to ask: what do we do now? How do we educate our own children? How do we cope with the education system and the healthcare system? And all the problems of, do we pack up our young people and send them away to study in the big city? Do we try to keep our young people here on the reservation in remote small communities, try to sustain our culture? Different things that push and pull at them. And generally, for my generation, the music and culture of those people, it made a transition from country music to hip hop music, which is also interesting. You can definitely have a Cree guy from Western Saskatchewan meet a Cree guy from Eastern Quebec, same generation right now, and they can sit and talk about how they relate to African American rap music as music that, in some sense, some emotional, symbolic sense, right, it connects to their struggle. But again, there's a sense in which they don't have music of their own, music for their movement, shall we say, in this way. I've been to Indigenous peoples' political protests where they beat the drum and they can chant. Those songs don't have lyrics in the Indigenous language anymore. They can't sing in their own language. It's really quite sad to see them sort of pretending to sing a song that resembles what their traditional songs sounded like as they beat the drum at those protests. But just like sports fans at American stadiums do the same thing, they put on this imitation of an Indigenous people's war song, war chant. They actually can no longer sing in their own language. That's how close we are now to genocide. Interesting comparison. Gaza Strip, Indigenous people Canada, this climate movement in the United Kingdom. The proposal from Extinction Rebellion, which implicitly is being put forward to replace their former commitment to disruption. And disruption is what I would call violence light. They're calling it Project 3.5. They are reaffirming their faith in, their belief in, the false fact set down by Erica Chenoweth that if a cause is supported, a non-violent political cause is supported by 3.5% of the population, it will win. And 3.5% of the population of the United Kingdom, as they reckon it, is apparently 2 million. Now, they illustrate this tragicomically with the following example. In the year 2003, there was an anti-war protest. So that would be a protest primarily against the war in Iraq, to some extent against the war in Afghanistan. There was a protest, London, England, attended by 2 million people. And it failed. And it didn't work. And those 2 million people, in reality, were completely voiceless and powerless. And today, groups like Extinction Rebellion and people like you and I and people in the Gaza Strip and people in Israel and indigenous people who are scattered around reservations in Canada, you could look at that and you could learn any number of lessons from it. But here's what Extinction Rebellion has to say to you now, as they continue to gather millions of dollars in donations, as they sit on a vast fortune of your money, and as they ruin people's lives by wasting thousands of hours of their time. Okay? They say, if only those 2 million people had sat down to block traffic, if only they had refused to allow business as usual to resume, supposedly, they say, the British government, so at that time that would have been the government of Tony Blair, would have ended the war. The soldiers would have gotten on airplanes and come home. England would not have played any part in the role in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan that would go on and on and on for so many years thereafter. Right? That's the theory. Do you think the 2 million people in Gaza have lost because they weren't willing to sit down? You think that was the problem? You think their level of commitment, their level of passion for their cause, you think it was insufficient to sit down and disrupt traffic? Do you think any example of a disruption you'd like to use would be fine? But this is October of 2023. Do you think the disruption that the Gazans have brought about within the last month, how do you think that compares to 2 million people sitting down and blocking traffic in London? And by the way, no thought is given to how you will serve breakfast to 2 million people, where they will go to the bathroom. Like having 2 million, how long are they going to sit down? The logistics. I mean, even if you know about organizing a rock concert, you know, 2 million people is a lot of mouths to feed. And if you will allow me to be so crude, it's a lot of asses to wipe. It's a lot of portable toilets or whatever solution for sewage you're going to propose. 2 million Indigenous people in Canada. How is it possible that they are voiceless, that they are powerless? Oh, and I remind you, the number 2 million was arrived at in England because that's 3% of their population as they calculated. 2 million is much, much more than 3.5% of the population of Canada. 2 million is much, much more than the population of Israel. It's also much, much more than the population of Palestine. Like, what should we even be considering this a percentage of? Like, what do we calculate for Gaza? Right? So the numbers are quite boggling. It's really dangerous what it is we have been lulled into believing over the last 10 years. Now, what I'm about to say to you should be obvious. It should be well known to everyone in this audience, and you should share this link with your friends, whether they are high school dropouts, university graduates, or professors wielding PhDs. Whatever level of education you're at, these claims, these pseudo-scientific claims attributed to Chenoweth, they have been invoked so many times by so many movements, especially vegans, but not only vegans, within the last 10 years, that everyone should be familiar with the facts I'm going to point out. But if you're really honest with yourself, please stop and reflect. Have you ever heard anything like this from anyone before? Why is this not part of our discourse? Why is this not part of the political debate for our generation in our time? The original claim made by Erica Chenoweth was that 53% of nonviolent political campaigns succeed. 53. Who in their right mind would treat that as a compelling or convincing figure? If we have a new brand of toothpaste and it's only effective 53% of the time, if we have a new pill for headaches to compete with aspirin and it helps people feel better only 53% of the time, 53% is not a very impressive number, right? 53% effective. 53% of the time, I'm 100% certain this strategy is going to work. But I know what you're thinking. Well, she must have examined thousands of case studies. I mean, for 53% to be an impressive percentage, she must have studied 10,000, 20,000 examples of nonviolent movements so that it's edged out this way. Now, before I tell you the number for how many movements she examined in computing this percentage, let me ask you, what if I made a different selection of examples, just a different definition of success and failure, right? Like, okay, South Africa, do you call that a success? Do you call that a failure? A lot of these, how about the Cree and Ojibwe? Well, so what? If you're not completely extinct, is that a success or a failure? I mean, any nonviolent movement attached to our indigenous peoples, what gets counted as a success and a failure? Even looking at the same case studies, it's debatable, right? The Vietnam War, the protests to end the Vietnam War, you call that a success? I call it a failure. Even if we're looking at the same case studies, I can probably shift the percentages from 53% to 47%. But what if I am making a different selection of examples? What if I say Cambodia matters and she wasn't paying attention to Cambodia? What if I say Romania matters? Whatever, it could be anywhere in the world. I just have a different set of interests, different periods of time, different examples, nonviolent movements. And what if instead of this impressive number of 53, what if it's 47? Are you going to change your view of ecology? Are you going to change your view of the history of Israel and Palestine? You're going to change. What is going to change? Is this falsifiable? Is this a scientific idea you can change your mind about? Or is this a religious doctrine where it doesn't matter what the numbers are? You are going to believe it anyway. All right. What if I told you 53% of people who pray to get better from cancer, their cancer goes into remission? I'm still not going to believe in prayer, right? I don't believe in the mechanism. I think it's a coincidence that some people pray and their cancer goes into remission because I don't believe in the mechanism. This is the next step in question. But at that first stage of hypothesis formation, the numbers are not there to even support proposing the hypothesis because the original number was 53. Would anyone in the audience like to guess how many thousand cases today? You guys could Google it. Would any of you like to guess how many thousand cases she examined to come up with this nice, neat figure? You notice it's not 53.2. It's not 53.8. She looked at exactly 100 cases. 53% of 100 is 50 fucking 3. Hashtag, I am not a math scientist. She only looked at 100 examples. So let me ask you, now, just chronologically, you already know this isn't possible. Do you think her examples should include what happened in Myanmar within the last 10 years? Myanmar, also known as Burma. Do you think her examples should include what happened in Iran? Now, we could probably get 5 different examples from Iran, but lately we've been especially talking about this feminist movement, women's equality movement in Iran. Do you think it includes what happened with the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong in the last 10 years? And look, guys, you have to be willing to consider examples you personally disagree with. Probably no one is watching this video who is like a Catholic, morally opposed to abortion. Are you willing to include examples like that? Nonviolent resistance movements that were trying to make abortion illegal. Like you gotta challenge yourself. You gotta look at all kinds of different examples. Okay, so there were only ever 100 examples, and only 53. These are the examples she chose. Her definition, her choice, her selection. 53% effective. If we just add the couple I've named from more recently than when that was published in the last few years, right? Okay, Myanmar, didn't work. Hong Kong, it didn't work. Iran, it didn't work. How many examples from Communist China? Communist China is a world unto itself. It's not really like one country. It's just so enormous. There's so many political examples you could pull out of Communist China. Okay, how many failures can we add to the list? At what point do we admit that the number is not 53? Maybe it's 47. Maybe it's 37. Maybe it's actually a diminishingly tiny percentage that are successful. And that's looking at it quantitatively. When you look at it qualitatively, right? How many decades passed with how much misery for what kind of outcomes? How much political change at what price? Now, the other thing that haunts this discourse about so-called nonviolence. Someone says, LOL. He looked so upset when he said 100. I'll have to watch it back. I am upset. I am upset. And, guys, I didn't think people were this stupid. I really didn't. Before Melissa met me face to face, I remember she wrote to me about this ridiculous campaign to blacken my name that was going on the internet. And it's like people sharing the link to this Reddit page that said these terrible things about me. But to the credit of the person who wrote this Reddit article, there were the links to the sources. And all you had to do to know that this was false was like click on the link. It says, oh, he said this terrible thing. And then you click on the link and you see what I actually said. And it's like, what do you mean? there was really nothing terrible there. And it's like, that's all you had to do was one mouse click to figure it out. Okay, well, I am 10 years deep into this issue right now. And what percentage of humanity is smart enough, is self-disciplined enough, is detached enough to take that one mouse click? It's terrifying to me. I didn't think we were this stupid. And, you know, whether or not you're talking about the bulk of humanity, not everyone reads newspapers. Not everyone cares about politics. Like the self-selecting minority of humanity who are trying to save the world, or at least trying to change the world. Yes, it's utterly terrifying to me to discover that people really are this stupid. So, as I say, I've just talked you through this. Um, the sort of dubious quantitative basis for these claims. Who other than myself, who's ever talked this through? If you've been to any protest, I mean, sorry, I've seen this within the last 10 years within the vegan movement, Wayne Seong and Direct Action Everywhere, but really every major vegan movement has done fundraising on this basis. Um, Basically taking the myth of Chenoweth, Erica Chenoweth's research, and one way or another stretching out the implications and saying, oh, so therefore, if you donate money to us and we print so many pamphlets and we do so many disruptions and so that this is the proven, this is a factually proven. These are the quote unquote the facts of social science research. So I have 10 years of cross-examining and questioning this. And I have to ask you, who's with me? Right? James Aspie hasn't changed. Joey Carbstrong hasn't changed. Nobody else in the vegan movement has changed. The only thing that's happened is that the vegan movement has collapsed. All right. And look, sorry, come back to what I said before I started reading your comments, guys. The whole discourse about nonviolence is vitiated by fantasies about violence. So I have many, many clips of the former leader of Extinction Rebellion, Roger Hallam, that proves that when he's talking to university students, he really is inciting them to violence. So that's part of my critique of him. You say this is not violence, but really what you're talking about is violence. So that's a topic for a separate video. I have made videos. I have proven that point. But he compares what he wants to happen to September 11th. And I have a clip of him saying that. Okay. That is talking about violence. That is fantasizing about violence. Now, do I think he is actually plotting a terrorist attack? No. But if you look at his rhetoric and you ask the question, what do you think this means to a teenager in the audience? What is a reasonable interpretation of what he's saying? He is saying he needs a big changing sudden event like this, such as, well, you couldn't reproach the audience for misinterpreting what he's saying if their interpretation of nonviolence is violence. This is one side of the problem. The other side I want to draw attention to is this. When Extinction Rebellion today, when they talk about what might have been, what could have been accomplished in the year 2003, if only those 2 million people had sat down. You don't think they're wondering, what if it had been 2 million people with rifles, with pistols? What if it had been 2 million people who burned down the House of Parliament? What then? Like, the notion that 2 million people could bring a stop to the British invasion of Iraq, could bring a stop to the British participation in the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, that they could accomplish that by sitting down. Okay? In a world where, whatever your perspective on the Israel-Palestine conflict, can't we all admit to ourselves that 2 million people in Gaza have no voice, have no power, have no influence in politics whatsoever? And, there are many reasons why. Okay? But one of them is that they're wrong. Okay? Like, being right matters. If you think solar panels can end global warming, you're wrong. And a really good example, because some people used to believe in this just a few years ago. If you believe emissions trading, emissions credits, carbon credit trading, these are all different words for the same thing. If you believe emissions trading can end global warming, you're wrong. If you believe that people eating grass-fed beef, free-range grass-fed beef, instead of factory farm beef can end global warming, you're wrong. The Allen Savory, millions of people believed these things, okay? Like, gee, when we actually start to think about what the factors are that matter, that really matter for who has the voice and who doesn't, and which movements succeed and which fail. A whole lot of things start to matter, including religion, including belief, right? Including whether or not factually and morally and ethically you're right or you're wrong. And I'm going to say two things. This shows how close the discourse about nonviolence is to the discourse about violence. When you are in the wrong, no amount of nonviolence can make you right. And when you are in the wrong, no amount of violence can make you right. One of the easiest magic tricks to perform is walking down the street and asking someone, what number am I thinking of? I could do this today, and I could upload a video to YouTube that makes you all think I'm telepathic. It's much the same if you deal cards and show a number and then say, okay, now I'm going to read your mind. What number was on the card? I can guess 7 every time, and we can film me guessing the number 7 with 100 people. And if just 5 of them were thinking of the number 7, we remove all the other examples in editing, and it looks like I'm a telepath. It looks like I'm psychic. It looks like an amazing magic trick, right? Just through the selection of examples and the concealment of evidence. Okay, so with the framing of our still ongoing discourse about nonviolent political resistance, nonviolent protest, the supposed conclusions of social science research about how to change the world, it has relied on precisely this kind of lie. Now, I have to ask you, you're not going to answer me now in the comments, I don't think particularly. Someone in the audience says they were thinking of 7. Next time, we'll hold up a card for the camera for my next trick. Erica Chenoweth could have cooked the books. She used 100 examples, right? It's a nice round number, and 53 of them, by her definition, were successful, so it's 53%. What if she sat there and thought, this isn't strong enough? I'm going to go around and find another 100 examples. I'm going to make it out of a total of 200 so I can get the number up to 70%. Right? Any of you could do that today. With the power of Google, you could say, okay, I want to find another 50 or so examples of nonviolent protests that work. I want to put together my own list. I want to put together my own set of case studies. I want to do the math. I want to present this as a scientific discovery, as a fact. Sorry, I come back to this again and again. False facts are so dangerous because they endure for a long time, and they prevent, the the progress of science. In a sense, it's to her credit that she presented these findings. She didn't conceal the weakness of this. What an unbelievably weak relationship. 53%. And the inference that if you have 3.5% of the population supporting you, thus in the United Kingdom, 2 million people supporting you, that you will achieve your goal. When Extinction Rebellion themselves present to us the example of 2 million people protesting against the war in Iraq. Why couldn't they win? Because of what they were protesting for. I'm going to tell you this. It doesn't matter if 2 million people non-violently protested for Saddam Hussein. Wouldn't matter if 4 million non-violently protested for Saddam Hussein. I'm going to go further. If 200,000 armed gunmen had gone and burned down the Parliament building in London, or if they'd carried out massacres like you just saw, Gaza, surrounding areas of Israel, if they'd carried out massacres like Hamas in the name of supporting Saddam Hussein, in the name of supporting the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, I guarantee it doesn't matter if it was 200,000 violent protesters or 2 million non-violent. We can keep jacking up the numbers. Okay. The majority of the population would have absolutely redoubled their efforts. They would have said, just look, this shows you what we're fighting against. This shows why it's so important that we exterminate the Taliban. This shows you why it's so important that we exterminate the Saddam Hussein regime. This shows you that we have a problem right here on the home front. We have crazy Meshuggah armed terrorists on the streets of London who variously support the regime in Iraq or Afghanistan. Any of you who are just old enough to remember, you all know that I'm right. I mean, if you're 22 years old right now, sorry, you don't know. But you have to be of a certain age to remember what was going on politically in that period, 2001 to 2005, say. There is absolutely no way a nonviolent protest could have stopped the war in Afghanistan or in Iraq. And there is no way a violent protest could have. A violent protest would have brought about the same kind of reaction you have just seen in the Gaza Strip, in the conflict with Israel. Doesn't matter if you have 3.5%. It doesn't matter if you have 2 million supporters. We remain in the infancy of understanding this issue. I have seen one generation of ecological activists grow wealthy, grow old, and retire and give way to another. The epoch of PETA came to an end. The epoch of Freely the Banana Girl came to an end. The epoch of Durian Rider. The epoch of James Aspey, Joey Carpstrong. The epoch of Dr. Gregor. Okay, millions of dollars. I've made videos about this. You go ahead and estimate how many millions of dollars Dr. Gregor has made from his advocacy for the vegan movement. Okay, how many millions in total went into Wayne Seong's organization? Any of these groups, Anonymous to the Voiceless, you name it. Okay. Some of them retire while they're still young and handsome. Some of them retire when they're old and gray. I have seen one generation come and go after another, accomplishing nothing aside from making themselves wealthy, aside from briefly making themselves famous. Gary Yourofsky. The list of names goes on and on. Gary Francione, for that matter. Where are they now? And you know what? I have very little sympathy for the people of Gaza, but they have to be sitting around and asking themselves the same questions because they've seen one generation of radicals, one generation of would-be revolutionaries, and one generation of holy men, of religious leaders who came with all these promises. They've seen one generation come and go. And those men got famous, and they got rich, and some of them got killed, and some of them got put in jail. And here we are, left to wonder why the movement isn't moving. Okay. There is no hope for Gaza. There is no future for the Palestinian people. There is no future for the vegan movement. There is no future for any currently existing ecological movement, climate change movement, carbon sequestration movement. None. We are all quite literally going to die without accomplishing anything because we remain beholden to false facts, to fabrications, to baseless beliefs, just as ridiculous as circumcision.